Welcome to another episode of Let's Go There, the podcast by the New Testament Church of God Women's Discipleship Ministries. Our podcast features a range of individuals providing spiritual insight, empowering advice, and biblical principles for everyday challenges. You were made to live the free life in Christ. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Hello, my name is Delroy Hall. I'm a pastor and regional bishop with over 30 years experience within the Church of God of Prophecy. I've also got 30 years experience as a psychotherapist and a trainer. And I've been asked to do 4 sessions on loss, grief and bereavement. Today in the first session, which will be about 10 minutes, I'll be looking at what loss is, grief and bereavement. And then I'll be looking at some of the theories around how we understand loss, grief and bereavement. And then I'll be just indicating towards the end some of the practical ways that we can help each other and help others as we work through this thing called loss and grief. What I'd also like to say that over the next 3 sessions after this, I'll be spending more time exploring what we can do to help us during this difficult time. So first I'll say that loss is a natural part of life, but obviously COVID-19 has exacerbated the propensity of loss and the pain of loss. And sometimes when we think of loss, we think purely of somebody passing away, and there's been lots of that, and I'll come to that in a moment. But let's just think about the amount of losses many of us have experienced over the last 18 months. The loss of routine, the loss of regularity, the loss of commuting, going into work, working from home, the loss of freedom by having to wear masks. Children who weren't with their peers at school, they've experienced a loss as well. And if we start listing the amount of losses that we've had, it comes to a fair bit. Somebody like myself, when I was working at a university, when I'd finished with a client, I'd perhaps leave the office and then I'd speak to my peers going to the office or to the kitchen. All that thing has gone. It's lost and it's affected us in ways and in various ways. One of the things I've noticed, especially with older people, as I'm beginning to circulate around them more, and many of them have lost their confidence, not going out as regular and so forth, and being on the bus and doing their own shopping. Many of them have lost the confidence and a lot of the independence that they had for years. They've lost it, and there's a level of anxiety and loss of confidence. So when we start thinking about loss over the last 18 months, it's huge, and we've dealt with it in various ways. But I'd like to talk about how it's affected us in one way. You know, we're meeting people now. We're not too sure whether to elbow, to bump fist, or to hug, or to kiss on the cheek. It's made us so unsure and loss of confidence, not too sure what to do. That in itself is a loss. What I say to people is that a loss is more or less like an emotional tsunami. Uncontrollable wave that's taken place. If we've saw the last tsunami, major one in 2014, it was devastating. And one of the things we need to bear in mind, this happened in 2014, I believe. It is now 2021. 7 years have passed. It's not in the news now, but the people are still rebuilding their villages and community. The same thing with loss. We may have experienced loss years ago, but we can still be experiencing some of the losses years later. And I'll share a little bit more about that later on. I'd like to talk now for a few moments on some of the theories around grief. One of the things I'll say before I do that is this. If you don't remember anything else over the next 4 sessions, is this. Grief is universal, but it is deeply personal. Grief is universal, but it is deeply personal. Nobody can say to you, you shouldn't be feeling like this. You feel what you feel. Grief is universal, but it is deeply personal. The person who really kind of studied grief, loss and grief was Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who was a doctor, and she was examining patients, terminally ill patients. And she came up with 5 areas, and it's very known to lots of us. Denial, which happens to a lot of us. You know, when you hear that somebody's died and we say, no, I can't believe it. Denial is the first stage. The second stage is anger. and where we do get really angry because the person has gone and perhaps left us in a mess, or we have got to do things for ourselves and having to live life without them. Bargaining, it's something that we do, many people do as believers, that we bargain with God. God, if you make so-and-so live, I will serve you. We bargain with God, and these type of things. Number 4 is depression, low mood, feeling really, really flat. And the 5th stage is acceptance. Now, I've spoken about these 5 stages in about 40 seconds, maybe a minute. But actually, they say that the process of grief can take up to 4 years, and in some cases even longer, where people are going through all the ups and downs of emotions, and sometimes you're triggered off in ways you don't even know. All that is perfectly normal, how we respond to loss. Just before Elizabeth Kubler-Ross died, she said that what she was trying to do was trying to just provide some understanding of loss and grief. But she said it is a messy process. It's messy. And even these 5 stages doesn't sanitize or make it easier. There's another process called the dual process model. And what happens, we think it's a way of dealing with the pain and thinking of ways that we can deal with the pain. It's a kind of backwards and forwards, hence the term dual. Sometimes we're dealing with the pain, looking to the future. Back to the pain, dealing with the future. That's a way in which people can look at loss and grief. Another one is reconstruction of meaning. A bereavement turns your world upside down. Everything is shattered, loss of identity, lots of status, lots of kudos. Even many people become unwell. Financial income. And one of the things about the reconstruction of meaning, we get into this process of thinking, what does all this mean? What did this person mean to me when they were alive? How significant were they in their life? And one of the things that I have dealt with as a pastor, for some people, when the person dies, it's a relief, not so much from the illness, in some cases it is, but when the person was alive, they were a tyrant, they were miserable, they were difficult to be with, and now the loss of that individual can be a relief, and the individual can now begin to get on with their life, and it happens in church too. The final theory is that what's called the TEAR model, TEAR. Developed by a guy called William Worden. T stands for to accept the reality of the loss. That's really important. To accept the reality of the loss. E, to experience the pain of the loss. That's really important. A, to adjust to the new environment. The person is now gone. They're no longer around. And maybe there's a loss of going to work and all that type of thing, and a lot of routine. There's the adjustment to the new environment. And R is reinvent the new reality. The situation has now changed. It's not going to go back to as it was. The person has passed. They're not going to come back. So there has to be a reinvention of the new reality. And how do we do that? Grief affects our entire humanity. Bio, psychosocial, spiritual, sexual. I think I'm going to elaborate on them in a few more in the other sessions. But remember that grief affects our entire humanity. Bio, which is body. Psychosocial, which is our mind and emotions and relationships. Spiritual is meaning. And sexual, how we deal with intimacy and so forth. So what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to give you some areas that we'll cover over the next few sessions. Grief is sadness felt over experiencing loss of job or a limb or separation, friends moving away, broken relationship, and so on. Number 1, give yourself the permission to feel. Having those emotions is deeply important, and feeling them. Don't bury them. Don't spiritualize them. Don't sweep them under the carpet. Feel them. Write a letter to the deceased loved one. It's called the unsent letter. Really important in helping people deal with grief. Journal about positive memories about the individual, the one who's gone. What was it like? Some of the happy moments, places you went on holiday, places you'd like to visit, places you'd like to go for meals. Write about those positive moments. Number 4, talk to someone. Talking to someone, especially a professional, is really helpful during this particular time. Maybe not immediately when somebody's passed, it's too raw, but maybe 6-7 months afterwards, then when things have settled only a tiny bit, then you can actually talk to someone. The other thing is, believe it or not, is number 5, I believe. Understand that grief affects everybody. As I said earlier on, grief is universal, but deeply personal. Here's one that's going to surprise some people. Even when you're grieving, lend a support to others. You will find somebody who's in a worse off situation with you. May not be loss and grief, maybe something else, but during this time, if you reach out to help someone, what that can do, it can take your mind off your own situation while you help them. And finally, be prepared for recurring grief. When you have lost somebody, when people say, have you not got over it yet? No, you will never get over it. You learn to adjust, but years into the future, something can happen, a trigger, and it just sets everything off. And I'll close with this. My father died 32 years ago, and last year sometime I was talking to a friend about my father. He was talking about his, and I was in a public place in Sheffield, where I'm from. And as I was talking about my father, I burst into tears. And my father died 32 years ago. So grief affects everybody. Grief is universal. Grief is personal. And over the next 3 sessions, I'll be expounding the practical ways that I've mentioned already that we can really use to help people, help ourselves, and help others in dealing with loss, grief, and looking forward to a different life without the loved one. Take care and God bless. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. We hope you found it inspiring and insightful. Stay tuned for our next episode. Subscribe and tell a friend. For more information about our ministry, please visit www.ntcg.org.uk/WDM. Thank you.